Hi everyone, welcome to the August 26th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragon. I'll be joined in just a moment by my usual co-host Craig Milkowski. This is the Travers Stakes edition of the show, as we'll be talking about the Pick 6 sequence on Saturday at Saratoga. That is Travers Day, and that sequence does culminate with the Midsummer Derby. But this Pick 6 sequence, it comprises all 6 Grade 1 races on this Saturday card. And, Craig and I were just talking a little bit before coming on that perhaps these aren't the most interesting races from a wagering standpoint. Some short prices look pretty formidable in a few of them, but I know that I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how some of these matchups shake out.
Yeah, I mean, it's some really strong fields in some of these races, some horses that have some really good form, but maybe still a few questions that their connections would like to see answered as we kind of get heading into the championship season and lead up to the Breeders' Cup. So looking forward to seeing some really big efforts this day. I suspect this is probably the only Pick 6 we'll see with all Grade 1s outside of a Breeders' Cup Saturday, maybe a Belmont Stakes, but I think there might be a Grade 2 mixed in there. So not often you get to see 6 straight Grade 1 races like we have here.
And I know that neither you or I are big Pick 6 players, but this is the kind of sequence that you might be able to play on a smaller budget because you do have some heavy favorites throughout and some races that look like you could narrow it down to 1 or 2 horses, and we'll talk about those and how formidable we think those favorites really are as we go through it. And I think it does start off with one of those races where you kind of have to decide whether you want to go with the heavy favorite or take a shot against her, and that is in race 7, the first leg of this sequence, the Grade 1 Ballerina going 7 furlongs. And Gamine looms large over this field as she comes in from California for Bob Baffert. We haven't seen her in a little while, but she's got plenty of early speed, and breaking from the rail, you've got to imagine they are going to be intent on getting to the front end. And just given the way that this race shapes up tactically, she's probably going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, she's one. I mean, I would like to take a shot against her, but starting at Pick 6, I don't know if I would want to get involved just because of a horse like her. I think she's going to be really tough to beat, and I doubt she would add much value at all. So personally, I'd just as soon play the Pick 5. I mean, I guess I could see where maybe some people have a few question marks. She hasn't run particularly fast this year, but she's been doing it, winning really easily. Last time out, she was able to win with a 1:16 speed figure, her best race of the year. And the one impressive thing about that for me was the way she was able to put away Edgeway, who is a pretty quick filly in her own right. And that one actually came back and moved right back to her 1:15 TimeformUS speed figures with a victory. But, after regressing down to a 1:03 when she faced Gamine. So that kind of tells me she's still the real deal, and it just will be very tough to beat her because I don't really see any other quality in here like her.
Yeah, I don't really know how to assess her because she was running some otherworldly races last year, particularly in the Acorn, and especially concluding her 3-year-old season in that Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint when she got a massive 1:31 TimeformUS speed figure. And like you said, she's been dominant this year, but she hasn't run those kinds of numbers. And I feel like she still kind of gets bet like she is that horse that's suddenly going to run a 1:30 type of number. And I'm not sure that I necessarily expect to see that out of her anymore. I've watched her workouts for this. It seems like Bob Baffert has really been training her hard in the morning for this race, so I would imagine that she's very fit coming off this 2-month break. But still, I have some questions about her, and I do think she's got at least one worthy rival in this race, and that's the horse all the way on the outside, the number 7 CC. CC, she won the Apple Blossom a couple years ago, and she kind of disappointed later in the season, but I like that this year they've come back and have kind of decided to focus more on the one-turn races. They did try to stretch her out once, but her 2 best performances, or her 2 victories, have come going this 7 furlong distance, and I really liked her effort last time out in that Princess Rooney down at Gulfstream. She made a really strong move from just off the pace to take that race over and beat a good horse in Estilo Talentoso, and I've watched her workouts since then on XBTV, and she's been out working Rushy for the Mike McCarthy barn, and he's a good workhorse in the morning as well, and just seems like she's coming into this race perhaps back in the best form of her career. And, if Gamine stubs her toe just a little bit, I think Cece's not that far off her.
Yeah, I can see that, I guess. The other one I would use personally would be Sconson, the 5 horse. I just think she's the best of the group, but it's a close toss with CC. I wanted to try to make a case for Casual because she's a horse that just never seems to get any pace. She's always in races with blue fractions, but there's a good chance that's going to happen again because there's just not a lot of other speed in here. So for me, this is one I'm probably just going to view as a spectator, not get involved in the horizontal bets. And even if you do really like Sconson or CC to run second, they're the close second and third choices on the morning line. So just a skip for me and watch as a fan and see what happens.
Let's move on to race 8. That is the grade 1 Forgo going the same 7 furlong distance, but this one is for the older males. And just in case, like Craig, that ballerina didn't really float your boat, this kicks off the pick 5 sequence that ends in the Travers. And this is a much more competitive race, kind of wide open on paper. I mean, perhaps Yopan will go off favored here. He was a disappointing favorite in the Breeders' Cup Sprint last year when he just didn't show up. And I think there were some major questions for him coming back off the layoff at Pimlico last time, and he did run a nice speed figure there, but he's never gone the 7 furlong distance before, and there are some others in here who are proven going this trip.
There are. I'm going to get sucked into Yopan here just because I think he has a huge edge on this field early. You can see it in our pace projector. We have him clear in front in the blue flags, and we favor horses on or near the early lead. And frankly, this group of older sprinters just doesn't inspire me at all. Now, I mean, Yopan is a 4-year-old. It's not like he's a 3-year-old. But he hasn't really faced these other than in that Breeders' Cup where he had some trouble at the start, didn't really run his race at all. And maybe something that just went wrong because he didn't run well in Maidan either when he came back. But I like this race at Pimlico. He beat some pretty good hard knockers. He was able to track the very fast Chateau, who we've talked about a few times on here. And personally, I'm just tired of the other ones in here. I don't think it's a very strong class, as we've talked about before. And I look for him to even take a step forward with his pace advantage, be able to handle that extra furlong.
Yeah, I decided to go a little bit against the pace projector here, and I just chucked Yopan in this race. He's not for me. I watched that race at Pimlico last time, and I was pretty underwhelmed. I know that the speed figure came back huge, and if he runs that kind of number against these proven sprinters in the division, he's probably going to beat them. But I didn't like that effort that much. He had to be ridden really hard to get into the race. I mean, it wasn't a surprise that he couldn't make the lead over Chateau, because like you said, that horse is just so fast. But I mean, he was moving in tandem with Lakai on the turn, and it really looked like Lakai was going better than him. And I mean, he did kick on late and beat that horse, but what I don't like is that Lakai came out of that race and he has been awful in 2 subsequent starts. I mean, he got a 120 finishing behind Yopan, and he's come back off that 120 speed figure and has run 103 and 97. So one horse running back poorly doesn't say that it's a bad figure. Just given that, coupled with the visual impression of me just not being impressed, I want to take a shot against him here. And there are some others in this race that have had their chances, definitely at this level, but I think might be coming back to a good performance. I mean, Lexitonian was a really game winner of the Vanderbilt, but you got 34-1 on him that day, so I don't really want to take him coming back. I do think there are other horses coming out of the Vanderbilt, though, that you can use. One of those is Whitmore, who has just been knocking on the door all year, but I mean, he has won this race in the past, so he can handle the 7 furlong distance, and he was one of the few horses that was closing at the end of the Vanderbilt, so I want to give him some credit for that. Also, Firenze Fire, I know he's got this reputation as being a Belmont specialist, but I just didn't think he got the best trip in the Vanderbilt. He was squeezed back soon after the start, had to race out of position for much of that race. I think he's going to be much more forwardly placed going the 7 furlongs with a more moderate pace, and I like the outside draw for him, so I don't think he's out of it by any means. But the horse that I made my top pick is the number 4 Mind Control. I know that he's been one that's never run that fast, but he kind of has this way of just getting it done in his races, and we saw that last time when he made his first start for the Todd Pletcher barn, beating Firenze Fire in the John Nehrude over Firenze Fire's home turf at Belmont, and he didn't get the flashiest speed figure that day, but he was able to grind out the victory, and just feels like maybe he's getting back to his better efforts for Todd.
Yeah, I have no problem with him being your pick in here at all. I have to look at it as a speed figure guy. If Yopan can run a 120, he is likely to win this race because the others haven't been. of the older horses, I'd probably actually prefer Whitmore a little bit. He seems to be a horse who, maybe as he's getting older, I mean, he is an 8-year-old gelding now, he'll appreciate the 7 furlongs even more than he does 6. He ran a pretty good race in that Churchill Downs Stakes on Derby Day with that was at 7. So the distance isn't a problem. I just can't get behind any of these horses anymore that consistently run in the mid 1 teen speed figures. So I'd obviously prefer Yopon was going to be a bigger price, but you nailed the morning line. I'm sure he's going to take some money. So that's where I'm going to go in the pick 5.
Yeah, maybe I'll be wrong about Yopon. I just, I believe in speed figures too, but I am also a believer in class, and it bothers me that just the 2 times in his career where they've faced really top sprinters, he's just fallen apart, and all of his big speed figures have been earned against inferior competition. I just wonder if he's able to do it against top level sprinters, and we'll see. Maybe these aren't even top level sprinters, because like you said, this isn't the strongest division right now, and it's kind of crying out for somebody to take control, and maybe Yopon's going to be that horse. I just couldn't quite get there. Before we move on from this race, one more horse I want to ask you about is the number 1, Mischievous Alex. I mean, he was the favorite coming into the Vanderbilt. I couldn't give him an excuse for that race. I know he's got back races that make him a major player here and arguably just as fast as Yopon. I just didn't know what to do with him.
Yeah, I've never been a fan of his. I thought his the one big win this year in the Carter was kind of overrated, honestly. Even that Gulfstream Park race where he kind of jumped back on the map this year in his first stakes try. And I've just never thought the figures match the visuals that we see from him. And the last 2 times, he's really disappointed. So he's definitely not for me in here.
Now, I will say, all of these 4-year-olds and older horses running in the Forgo better be happy that they changed the conditions of the Forgo to not allow 3-year-olds to enter, because the next race we're going to talk about, the Grade 1 H. Allen Jerkins going the same distance for the 3-year-olds, has perhaps drawn 2 of the best horses, and perhaps best one-turn horses, I should say, in the country, those being Jackie's Warrior and Life is Good. Now, there are far fewer questions about Jackie's Warrior, and I think he has to be considered strictly the horse to beat in this race, just based on how good he is right now and how good he was last time in that Amsterdam.
Yeah, it's they figured out pretty quick this was not a 2-turn horse, and he's just been lights out around 1 turn. So this is a race I'm most looking forward to on the day. It's probably not the best betting race, but anytime you have 2 horses coming in, particularly 3-year-olds with 130 speed figures, that's one I want to see for sure. It does make me laugh. You said about the Vanderbilt being at the same distance and the Forgo, I mean, not the Vanderbilt, being the same distance. Do you really think trainers are that smart that they put 3-year-olds in there instead of facing Jackie's Warrior in here? Because I don't. We rarely see that happen. They're going to stick with the age division as long as they will. But maybe somebody would have took a shot. In here, I think Jackie's Warrior is just going to be super tough to beat. No real shocker there. But if the main competition is Life is Good, he's a horse who I'm just not sure what his best is. He's coming off a long layoff. He was leading the Derby Trail, as we know, before he got injured, I guess, after the San Felipe. But what really stuck out to me is he's never really run any of those red fractions we see in Jackie's Warriors PPs. He's just a rocket ship out of the gate. Even when he broke bad a couple starts back in that Woody Stevens, or actually kind of got banged into, he broke maybe a half step slow. He's just a faster horse, and at this 7-furlong distance, I think the speed's really going to matter. And what bothers me more about Life is Good is he's been a horse who even Bob Baffert has seemed intent on putting him in the lead. I know it seems like a while ago talking about Medina Spirit, but he did not want that horse up there battling with Life is Good. He would kind of have them taken back intentionally. So I'm just not sure how that horse is going to face having some dirt kicked back or having a horse in front of him early. So what's going to be the second shortest price on the board, I don't want any parts of him. I will say Jackie's Warrior is my top pick. If I was going to use one other horse, it would be Following C in here. He is a former Bob Baffert horse, now in the Todd Pletcher barn, just like Life is Good is. But I've liked what I've seen from him since he switched. The Haskell was obviously a bit too far, maybe a bit ambitious by the connection to jump in, but I don't really blame him for giving it a shot. But I really like this turn back to 7 furlongs. I just don't know if it's good enough if he's good enough to challenge a horse like Jackie's Warrior.
Yeah, we're on the same page about Jackie's Warrior. I've been thrilled with his races around one turn since they've decided to focus on that this year. I thought he was just awesome last time in the Amsterdam, and if he runs his race and is able to brake cleanly, something that was a bit of a problem too back in the Woody Stevens, I think he's going to be really tough for this field to beat. And I do generally agree with the TimeformUS pace projector here that if they really do send Jackie's Warrior to go as fast as he can go early, he's a little bit quicker than everybody else, including Drain the Clock, who's drawn inside of him and actually was briefly ahead of him in the early stages of the Woody Stevens. But Life is Good is a major wild card in this race because I don't think we know how fast he can go on the lead. I mean, those pace figures that influence the TimeformUS pace projector are based on how fast he actually has run in his races, and a couple of those were two-turn races. But I mean, this horse showed easy speed in that 6.5 furlong debut, was basically under a hammerlock going 21 and 44 and change. I mean, is this the kind of horse that could get in front of Jackie's Warrior early? I don't know. I mean, that probably is not the plan for Todd Pletcher, but I mean, based on the races that we saw last year, he's a little bit, or I should say earlier this year and last year, he's a little bit of a runoff type, and he's hard for riders to control, and Mike Smith is not the kind of jockey to take a hold of a horse. So I think it's interesting to see tactically how this is going to play out and where Life is Good is going to be positioned early, because he might be a real thorn in the side of Jackie's Warrior, and we'll see if they go really fast up front. I mean, I just don't see a closer in this race that could possibly take advantage, because these are basically six speed horses. Even the one that's shown at the tail end of the field on the pace projector has a lot of speed, that being Judge and Jury coming off a big win against New York bred. So I don't know that anybody necessarily is going to take advantage of a fast pace, but I'm going to be interested to see how fast they do go up front.
Yeah, that was the thing. I was actually kind of hoping to look for a closer and maybe look for an exacta, but as you say, there are none. There are no horses in here who don't want to be up close early. Maybe somebody drops back and is able to adapt, but that's almost like just guessing sometimes, because until they've shown it, you really don't know. So I'm going to stand by Jackie's Warrior and mostly just hope for a fun, exciting race, and hoping when I sit down Saturday night and make some speed figures, I'll have another 130s type number.
Moving on to the final 3-race stretch of this sequence. Up next is the Grade 1 Personal Ensign, race 10. This one is going 1.125 miles on the main track for the fillies and mares, and Latruska is going to be the prohibitive favorite in this race. And I mean, what has she done wrong lately? Ever since they took those blinkers off after the Belle Dame last year, she's just been almost perfect. I mean, she had that head loss to She Dares the Devil at Oaklawn back in the winter, but that was when she didn't make the lead. And since then, she's just been unstoppable. And if she comes back in the same form that we've seen her in recently, it's going to be tough for anybody to beat her.
It is, but this is actually a race. If I'm playing the pick 5, which is debatable at this point, but I'm going to want to play a somewhat short ticket. But if I was going to spread in a race, it would be this one. And it's just hoping that Latruska wouldn't be allowed to just lope along up front all by herself in, moderate to slow fraction. She has shown she can go fast when she needs to, but I really don't. It's hard to picture that happening. Maybe I'm being silly because we see it often in NYRA where the riders can be a little passive, but I do think Jose Ortiz is almost going to have to go on Swiss Skydiver. There may be a couple other horses in here as well. Miss Marissa has shown some speed as time goes by, comes in from California. Her better races have been up on or near the front, though she threw in a bit of a clunker last time. So I'm hoping they're going to challenge her, and I'll make my top pick in a horse I would use in the pick 5 for sure, the 5 Royal Flag for Chad Brown. She got a great setup last time to beat Horologist, who we saw come back and demolish a field last week in a listed stakes at Saratoga. But I just think it's possible maybe she gets that trip again. She got a big speed figure that day, and if any of these horses are going to take advantage, she's the one that I think offers some value. Some other people might want to gravitate towards Bonnie South or Harvey's Little Goyle as horses that could pick up the pieces if you think the pace is going to get a little hot up front. And I have no problem with those, but I just think Royal Flag is the one that is in the best form and one I liked her last race, even though it was a perfect trip given the pace.
Yeah, I can't go against Latruska here. I personally don't see anybody applying that much pressure. I think the likeliest candidate to do that would actually be as time goes by, given the fact that her biggest victory came when they sent her to the lead in that Santa Margarita. So I could see Mike Smith and Bob Baffert hatching a plan to do the same thing here. I just don't see her having the gate speed to get in front of Latruska early, because Latruska, she often goes pretty quickly and then backs it down mid-race. So we'll see if she's able to do that here. I mean, I've just become a big fan of this horse. She just runs often and keeps showing up and seemingly keeps getting better. So Latruska is my top pick. I would use as backups, though, as time goes by, because I think she's got a big effort in her, and I don't think that last performance at Del Mar is a true indication of where she is. She's worked really well out of that race, and I don't think Bob Baffert would be shipping her here if he didn't expect a much better effort. And I also think Swiss Skydiver, I mean, she's got a race to beat Latruska somewhere in her. We saw it in the Preakness last year. We've seen glimpses of it since then, but she hasn't had ideal preparation. I know that running in the Whitney wasn't their plan A with this horse. They had to go there due to the quarantine for the Ken McPeak barn back in late July. But I do think that Swiss Skydiver might be able to move forward off that race. She just really needs to bring her best effort to take down Latruska.
Yeah, and that's why I said I would spread. I would use as time goes by. I would use Swiss Skydiver. Some others in here, as I mentioned as well, even maybe Harvey's Little Goyle going back to dirt for the first time. It just depends, because I'm going short in all the other legs. So if Latruska beats me, so be it. It's probably not going to pay anything anyway if I was right in the other legs. If crazy stuff happens, I wouldn't have had it. So this is the one race I'm picking the spread, just looking for a little uncertainty. I do agree with you about Swiss Skydiver. I think she is probably a horse who could beat her. I thought her Whitney was actually a lot better than that fourth beaten almost 11 length shows behind Nick's Go, because she actually challenged him a couple times in the race and didn't quit all that badly. So this was the spot they've been pointing for her all along, if I remember what I read in the DRF.
Yeah, and I don't really have a big problem with your pick of Royal Flag, because she's going to be a price in this race, and I mean, you're hoping the pace heats up a little bit. She has improved lately. I wonder if she's quite this good, but again, I mean, she is the kind of horse who is going to be picking up the pieces, and I'm not going to be at all surprised when she gets into the mix. We'll just see if that's good enough to win, and you know that both of us, especially me, we've always been a big fan of Harvey's Little Goyle. I think this is an interesting spot for her going back to the dirt. The turf races recently have not been quite up to the standard that she set at the end of last year, but maybe some given the ground really wasn't for her the last couple times. So I think it's an interesting spot getting back on the dirt here, and we'll see how she does. Let's move on to race 11. It is the Grade 1 Sword Dancer going 1.5 miles on the inner turf course. And this is a really competitive field. We've got the speedy Tribhuvan, who's drawn down towards the inside. You've got the deep closer Gufo, the Saratoga specialist Cross Border, the European shipper Japan. I mean, it's hard to know really where to start in this race, but it's one that many seemingly can win.
It is, and I guess I'll start with the horse who's almost for sure going to be in the lead, and that's the horse you have a fondness for, and I do as well, Tribhuvan. He's run some really solid races this year. No knocks at all. I'm sure he's going to be in the front. I think he's shed that tag of rabbit that was probably he was entered in a few times, but I really like what I've seen from him. I loved how he ran in the UN at 1 mile and 3/8. He proved the distance wasn't any big deal. So personally, I think he is the horse to beat. I would actually make him my second choice. I'm going to go too deep in this race. He would be one of them. And the other one is going to be the shipper Japan. Just it's similar to the sprint race we talked about earlier, where it's just kind of the same old horses that don't seem to step up in these big races. I know Cross Border was able to finally get a big win in the Bowling Green last time, but it just seemed like they just keep taking turns beating each other. So I'm not in love with any of these. I considered maybe Channel Maker, but I think he's a horse who runs big in these races when he can get to the front, and that's not going to happen here. So I'm going to center my ticket around, as I said, Tribhuvan and Japan.
Yeah, no surprise from my end. Tribhuvan is my new favorite horse in this marathon division. Sorry, Sadler's Joy, you're gonna have to move over. It's all about Tribhuvan now, and I just think he's gonna work out the right trip again here because there is other speed in this race, but those two horses, Channel Maker and Moretti, if that dirt horse even runs in here, I just don't see them being nearly as fast as Tribhuvan in the early going. I know that Moretti is shown a little bit closer to him than you might expect in the pace projector, but that's largely due to the fact that Moretti's coming out of dirt races, and dirt races just tend to have higher pace figures than the turf races do, especially over these marathon distances. So I just think Tribhuvan's probably going to wire another field. I know he's got to stretch out one more furlong to get the 1.5 mile distance, but that UN that he won last time at Monmouth might not have looked like the strongest field going into it, but coming out, horses have run really well. I mean, the 4th place finisher Serve the King just came back and won at Saratoga, the John's Call, yesterday, as we're recording this on Thursday. Fantasioso, who finished further back in the pack, came back and was 3rd in that same race. Glen County, who was 5th in the UN, came back and was a good 3rd in the Mr. D at Arlington. So that's been a productive race. And I just think Tribhuvan classes up pretty well against a group of American marathoners that I'm not too thrilled about. I didn't like the Bowling Green as a race that much. And I'm with you, Craig. I think the other horse is very much the Euro Shipper Japan. I know that his recent form leaves something to be desired, but if you kind of parse through it a little bit, it seems like he does better these days when the courses are good to firm or good, not so much when they're soft. And he's probably going to get his preferred kind of going coming over to this country.
Yeah, that was my thoughts on him exactly. I think the surface has had a lot to do with some of his bad performances. He had kind of a disappointing 4-year-old campaign, but I really liked what I saw in that return race, and Eden O'Brien sending him over. The distance shouldn't be a problem. He's handled it in the past, even though that last race was only at 1.125 miles. He should handle 1.8 miles just fine, and I really would be surprised if one of those two didn't win. I am glad you mentioned Moretti. I'm like you. I'll be surprised if he actually runs. I don't know if they took MTOs or not. Just seems like no real reason to run him on turf here. So that one seemed a bit interesting to me.
Let's close things out with the main event at Saratoga on Saturday, the final leg of that Pick 5 and Pick 6 sequence. It is the Grade 1 Travers, the Midsummer Derby, going 1.25 miles for the 3-year-olds. And I mean, the star of this race is obviously the Belmont Stakes winner, Essential Quality, coming off that prep win in the Jim Dandy. There's been a lot of talk about how he's just a horse that does what he needs to get the victory. He's never going to be the flashiest winner. He's never going to drop and win by 10 lengths, but he has a way of just finding the wire first, except for the Kentucky Derby when he did have that wide trip. He just keeps getting it done. So, I mean, he's obviously the horse to beat in this spot. I think it's just a question of how short of a price you really want to take on him.
Yeah, this is one where if I'm playing this race just vertically, I'm going to sit and watch, but I do plan on playing a Pick 5, and I said pretty short ticket, and I'm not going to try to beat him because I just don't particularly care for any of these horses in here. None of them have run particularly fast, anything like him. The second choice in the race, I think, is Midnight Bourbon. I've never thought he wanted any parts of 1.25 miles. If he was cutting back in distance from that Haskell effort, I'd probably like him, but stretching out another furlong, despite the incident he obviously had at the end, and we don't know how he would have finished, it looked like he was getting pretty tired to me that day, and I just don't see any reason to like him here. Keep me in mind, yeah, he was only beaten a half length by Essential Quality, but, there was a lot of difference in the ground saving, a lot in preparation, I believe. He was a horse who was probably keyed up for that race. He had been running pretty regularly. We hadn't seen Essential Quality since the Belmont. I think this was more of a prep. So for me, it's kind of hard to make a case against him. I have seen kind of the Wise Guy horse. I've seen a lot of people talking about Dynamic One, but he's a horse I just don't get at all. Yeah, he won that small stakes race, the Curlin, the day before the Travers, but he got just a 110 TimeformUS speed figure that day. So it would be a big leap to catch Essential Quality. So for me, he's going to be a single in the Travers.
Yeah, I'm not against Essential Quality per se, and I was kind of going back and forth about whether or not I wanted to pick him on top in this race. I ultimately decided to put somebody else on top and put Essential Quality second, just because I think that he's going to be an extremely short price, probably in the 3 to 5 range, if not lower. And, he's got this air of invincibility because he's won so much, but his margin for error is not that great. I mean, I know from a speed figure standpoint, based on the Belmont, he's run a much faster number than anybody else has, but I mean, I don't think he's going to go off and win this race by 5 lengths. And if something goes slightly wrong with the trip, and that's possible given that there's really not that much speed in this race and he's drawn inside, I don't think that I necessarily trust him to definitely overcome it. So kind of like in the Kentucky Derby. So we'll see how the trip shakes out, but I went with the horse that I do believe is going to be on the front end, and that's the number 1 Midnight Bourbon. I don't necessarily agree that I am worried about the distance with him. I think he gets the distance fine. I thought he proved that in the Preakness when he was right in the teeth of a pretty fast pace the entire way and did best of the speeds to hold on for second, well ahead of the horse that he was dueling with, Medina Spirit. And I don't want to hold the Haskell against him. He was probably on his way to a 3rd place finish by about 2 lengths at the time that incident occurred in mid-stretch. But I mean, the 2 horses that beat him that day, Hot Rod Charlie and Mandaloon, if they were running in this Travers, I'd be very interested in picking them potentially against Essential Quality, especially Hot Rod Charlie. And not that Midnight Bourbon has run as well as Hot Rod Charlie has, because he hasn't, but just looking at how the race is going to play out from a tactical standpoint, there is not much speed in this race, and drawing the rail, you have to think that Ricardo Santana and Steve Asmussen are going to hatch a plan to just go to the front end, try to slow things down a little bit, set a moderate pace, and take them as far as you can. And throughout this meet at Saratoga, we've seen, especially in the dirt routes, that speed is really dangerous. And I think this horse is a real threat to take them gate to wire, and I do believe he's going to be a square price because so much money is going to be garnered by Essential Quality. So that's the reason I picked Midnight Bourbon. He's the second most likely winner, but I'm going to make him my top pick.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, on our pace projector, we don't do favors early at races 10 furlongs or less. But if we did, he would get that flag here for sure, I would think, looking, just glancing at the running styles and the pace figures that the horses run. I'm pretty sure he would. We don't do that for a reason, because you don't often steal races at 1.25 miles, but he is a horse who's shown the quality to be able to do it.
Yeah, just a couple other horses I wanted to touch upon. I mean, you mentioned Dynamic One. I agree with you. I've seen some buzz around this horse. He was a visually impressive winner of that Curlin. I think he was clearly best in that race, but he's another one who's a deep closer, and I worry about him getting the right trip. I think he'll like the 1.25 mile distance, but I just wonder if he's really good enough and if he's going to have things work out for him in this Travers. And the one other horse that I would throw into the mix at a big price is the number 7 King Fury, another one of these Ken McPeak horses that got a prep in a race that probably wasn't ideal, but he did run some nice speed figures 2 and 3 back, and he has a little bit more tactical speed than I think his recent races might suggest. So he's a little interesting at a price, but I did think for me, it was between the 2 inside horses, Midnight Bourbon and Essential Quality. So as we wrap up, Craig, just to do a review, I don't know if we're thinking about playing the sequence or investing heavily in it, but it does seem like there are some races we can lean on. I know you said for you, Jackie's Warrior might be one, especially if we're not really putting a lot of money through the Ballerina. Any other races that you think you would spread or go thin in?
No, I will definitely go thin in the Sword Dancer. Like I said, I'm only going to use 2 horses, Troop Juven and Japan. That would be it there. As you said, Jackie's Warrior would be a single, and I'm going to single Essential Quality. Maybe you talk me into using some Midnight Bourbon as just a B, because you do make a good argument when you tell me you think the horse can get 1.25 miles. I'm going to tend to believe you because you follow that stuff more closely than I do, and he's certainly bred for it. So for me, it's going to be a lot of short legs in this one, and spreading the personal length and hoping I can beat Latruska.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. This is not the kind of sequence that I see paying, 4 figures even per se. So I would tend to try to go thin, and if you're going to hit it, try to hit it for the amount that it actually is going to pay, rather than going against your opinions to try to go for some gigantic score that might not be likely with this particular set of races. So, I mean, regardless of all the wagering, I know we're both really looking forward to seeing how this all plays out, especially in the Travers, to see if Essential Quality can kind of sew up that 3-year-old male championship in this race, because if he wins, he's going to have a really strong case opportunities for that moving forward. But there are other divisional honors that will be on the line and kind of pushed a little closer towards those Eclipse Awards at the end of the year with some victories on Saturday. So Craig and I will be back next week to do the TimeformUS Pacecast, and we'll recap all of it. So you can look out for that then. But remember, for now, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. So thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS Pacecast next Tuesday.